Welcome. I'm Joshua Malkin from the Kindness Revolution in Leeds, and I'm joined today by Matt Hawkins, co-founder and co-director of Compassion in Politics. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Josh.
I want to ask you to describe a little bit about your project, Compassion in Politics, how it started and what it's about.
Sure. So, just basic history to it. We launched, Jennifer Nadel and I came together and launched Compassion in Politics in October 2018. The purpose, really, the sort of strap line for it is to put compassion, inclusion and cooperation at the heart of politics. We do that through two main branches of work. One is looking at what are the changes that we can make to the parliamentary process to encourage more compassion, create a more cooperative, debating, cooperative and respectful debating atmosphere, more in touch with the views of the public. And then the second is through developing policy proposals, which we think are built on the value of compassion and would promote compassion in society. And we can describe perhaps some of both aspects in a bit more detail soon. Really the reason for launching, if it wasn't sort of just because compassion is a good thing anyway, we launched in 2018 when it felt like Parliament politics certainly was as divisive as it has been in living memory. MPs were being abused on the street, but so were particular groups in society. It felt like the toxicity of debate in Parliament was filtering down into the way that people were treating one another on the streets and in society. And there was a need to try and put a line in the sand and try and build a coalition of resistance against that. Added to which, we felt there had been a lack in British politics and campaigning, actually, that there wasn't really an organisation campaigning for a particular value to be at the heart of our political system. Lots of brilliant campaigns working on particular issues and particular areas, environmental, social justice and so on, but no one necessarily bringing that together and saying, why do we need these changes? And what is it that we have common ground over? What do we believe in? What's important to us? So that was the motivation. Now we're at a stage where we have just over 50 parliamentary supporters from 6 parties, have an all-party group. We're backed by a range of people like the Dalai Lama, to Professor Alice Roberts, the TV presenter, Gillian Anderson, the actor, a whole range of people. And brilliant to be involved in this festival too.
That's great. Thank you for that. And just to say, well done for standing up for those values. And, you know, it's something that is absolutely aligned with the Festival of Kindness, Compassion and Wellbeing. But I'd like to just dig a little bit deeper around democracy. And what would a compassionate democracy look like that's different from a democracy that we have at the moment? And is the answer only parliamentary, or is it more a wider culture change?
It's a really great question. What would a compassionate democracy look like? I think it might be helpful. I'll start with how we've got where we are, and Great. Then that can kind of lead to some of the solutions as we see it. So I think for us, we read the problem as twofold, roughly. One is we live in a society which is very much built around competition. Since the 1980s, we've been told that greed and selfishness is primary, is good, and should be encouraged. And that has divided us from one another. It's divided us also financially and socioeconomically. That is a value which sits at the heart of our politics and the way that we do politics in Britain. And that is shown by the way in which the structures of politics work. We have a largely two-party system which channels down interests and views to just two parties. no matter what your view of them is, that doesn't seem like a very good democracy and creates this unnecessary division between them. Coalitions here are considered the worst outcome of an election possible, whereas in other countries they are commonplace. We have whips who create black books on MPs to bully them to following particular lines. The Houses of Parliament is positioned so that they're two swords lengths apart between the opposition leader and the leader of the government, and so that they can shout across the divide at one another. Whereas if you visit pretty much any other parliament, you will find that they sit in a circle. So it's set up to be a much more respectful, cooperative decision-making arena. So we would pretty much do away, if we were looking at creating a more compassionate environment, we would have to do away with quite a lot of those processes. We'd have to change the electoral system. We would have to change the way people literally sit in Parliament. We would do away with booing, jeering, shouting in Parliament and have proper, respectful, detailed debate. We would, as you also indicate, build a culture where we can disagree, but we do so on the issues, not on the personalities. And we do so to improve decision-making and the outcomes that come from decision-making, not to bring the other side down. I think, though, that there is something else which is fundamental, and that is devolution of power and responsibility. We live in a large and very complex society, and the idea that a central government can make all the decisions and make them correctly is ludicrous, especially in a globalized society. And I think that has created a sense of false promise between what government can, or what political parties promise at an election, and what they can then deliver in government. And we have one of the most centralized political systems in Europe, and we urgently need to devolve that responsibility with the resources backing it up to cities, towns, regions, to the people. And actually, there's some, if people are interested, there's some very good recommendations on this on a very recent report. Danny Kruger MP's Conservative MP has gone away and written a report called Levelling Up. And there's some really great proposals in there on devolving responsibility away from the centre. And we would certainly endorse some of those ideas. So, and that in the process, in terms of creating compassion, not only is it necessary, but it also creates trust. It creates a sense of responsibility. It creates bonds. It humanizes the political process. So you're not just dealing with a computer at home trying to log into a system that's run by Westminster, and it doesn't make any sense to your daily life. So that's a smattering of kind of the things that we would want to change.
So on the one hand, we've got this historic heritage. We've got a system that calls itself the mother of parliaments, but actually is dysfunctional in the modern age as things have evolved. Perhaps it's no one's fault, but it's as though things have overtaken us without our noticing, that we've ended up in a situation which people have little influence over unless they're members of the main parties, and even then the numbers of people who are members of political parties is limited. So we've got this, if you like, heritage. And the question is, how can we move forward? And what is it, do you think, that's going to, what is it going to take for, on the one hand, MPs to realise that actually sticking with what we've got isn't going to get us to where we need to get to? And on the other hand, what can we do with constituents to realise the same, to encourage the MPs to realise that? I think we've got to go from both ends, and I think that's in the festival here we see kindness as a frame whereby if people can respect each other as human beings and listen to others' views, as you I'm sure would agree, that collaboration can build a more value than an antagonistic system where one group win no matter how large or small the majority.
Absolutely. I think that element of, I think it's very useful to look at political reform, and this is partly again why we established ourselves, because we were thinking, well, how can we approach issues like political reform with one central value? And if you take the kindness/compassion approach to political reform, you look at it and you say, well, what needs to happen to bring people closer together, create opportunities where they're going to understand their views more, and see one another as human beings, not as just as an opposition camp to be cut down. In terms of what can be done, I mean, we at Compassion Politics, we've got a number of proposals that we're working on. We do this through our all-party group, but also with others. Things like creating constituency boards. So at the moment, most people's access to their MP is very limited. They go on their own to meet with the MP. The situation is created where the MP already has power, because they set the time of the meeting, the location. It's not anyone's fault. It's just the way it's traditionally done. And the person takes their grievance, and that's it. That's kind of how it works if you have a surgery, MP surgeries. There's no rolling dialogue. There's no representation from any other side. So what we want to do is create constituency boards selected by sortition, probably meeting about 4 times a year, different representatives, different walks of life, and they would meet with their MP and have what is essentially a moderated discussion around what's going on in the constituency and national life. And it's modelled on the idea of a citizens' assembly, but it's more of a general ongoing conversation that you can have. So that's one thing. We want MPs to do work experience. Lots of MPs do brilliant work in their constituencies already, and regularly go back in the summer to work in their constituencies. But what we want to do is make that more of a formalised system where every MP will spend a month, 2 months working at the front line of their constituency to understand what's going on. We want to have adopted a new code of conduct. The current code of conduct for MPs is quite out of date and largely inadequate. MPs, to give you an idea, MPs in the House of Commons, the rule book says they are responsible for behaviour in the House of Commons. They police themselves, and I don't think in any other walk of life that would be considered acceptable. So that has to change. We need proper HR procedures in Parliament. Again, they largely police themselves, and it's one of the things that's led to the sex harassment and bullying scandals that we've seen in recent months. So there's lots of these kind of changes that we can make. In terms of how we can get MPs to realise, I think a lot of MPs do know that the situation isn't good enough, and they want to change it. I think the problem is they feel powerless. So our job is partly to bring them together and create that collective power. But also, as you say, if you have constituents getting in contact with them and saying, we want this system to change, it doesn't represent us, it needs to be more respectful, kind, compassionate, calling for that kind of behaviour at elections, voting for it, that creates the pressure. And it also means MPs can go to their party leaders and say, I've been contacted by 50, 100 constituents saying they want these changes. And it gives them the ammunition to try and deliver some of that change as well.
That is very exciting. I love the idea of constituency boards. One of the other events that is happening, I think tomorrow, but people can look on the website or on the Watch Again page, is about evolving democracy with Andy Pace, who has run citizens' assemblies. And the idea of constituency boards is very exciting, because what it does, if you like, if it's a kind of cross-party constituency board selected by random sortition, it means that different views can be held in that space and be heard by the MP. And I suppose part of our way of working is that, as well as people who are experienced and experts knowing solutions, I think the people at the front line often know the solutions themselves. And the idea that communities very often have the answers themselves is something that needs a process to bring out that wisdom, harvest that wisdom that's in the community. So that idea of constituency boards enabling MPs to hear a wider range of views, enabling constituents to listen to each other respectfully, and to harvest ideas that perhaps haven't been sufficiently promoted. I think that's a very effective model. Have you run any of these constituency boards yet? And if not, what are your plans for doing so?
Alas, not yet, but we are planning to try and pilot them next year. We're trying to, obviously, what we want it to be a partnership with the MPs. It's not something we want to force upon them, because then they'll enter it in the wrong spirit. So we're going to go out to some of the MPs we work with and suggest that we work in tandem with other organisations to set it up. So anyone out there who's interested, do contact us, because it's very much a open planning stage at the moment. And I think people will be naturally sceptical about whether something like that can work. But what I would say is look at where citizens' assemblies have been used, or things similar. Look at Ireland, and the power that that's had on an issue so divisive culturally and religiously there, on abortion and on other issues, and how powerful that's been in bringing communities together. I think it's can only be a very good thing and a very exciting thing for democracy. That's
very exciting. I certainly think there's a way forward there. One question I'd ask you so far, what would you say your biggest successes have been? Because starting from scratch with an idea around compassion that most people don't associate with politics, that must have not been an obvious immediate success story. Would you like to share some of the successes you've had? Because I did come to your first launch event, which I thought was fantastic, and there were some fantastic speakers there, including from Yorkshire as well. So, but I wonder whether you'd like to say a little bit about your successes.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, I think, I mean, as you have sort of indicated, in a way, getting the idea out there was the first stage, and we've been really pleased with the coverage and the interest, and getting 50 MPs or parliamentarians to sign on and say they support it, getting the all-party group set up and launched and co-chaired by two different parties, Debbie Abraham's Labour and Baroness Varzi Conservative, and then getting public supporters. All those sorts of things just show that there is interest and appetite, and we've been able to get the idea out there. I think obviously all of this hinges on actual practical change. I'd say, looking back, the three things I'm probably most proud of so far: we launched a campaign during the 2019 election, simply called Stop the Nastiness, and asked every candidate to sign a pledge saying that they would behave in a particular way during the election. That was then published on our website so people could see who had signed up, what they'd signed up to do. It wasn't massive. It wasn't like it took off and everyone signed it. There's actually more the qualitative evidence we got back, which was that people who signed it said that if they noticed that others in their constituency had signed it, it immediately made a difference to how they approached them and saw them and campaigned against or with them, or however you want to see it. And actually it sparked conversations as well at hustings. So that, it's a small thing, but it's a start. We launched a new code of conduct for MPs with More United, the campaign group, and over 100 MPs have signed that voluntarily so far. And that gives us real power to go and say to the party leaders and to the Speaker in the House of Commons that this needs to be adopted formally, not just voluntarily. And then probably thirdly, one of the sort of campaigning techniques I guess we use is just, if we spot things that we think could be pushed through with a bit more energy and coalition working, that is a piece in the jigsaw towards a more compassionate politics. We'll go for it. We're quite flexible. We can do that. And at the start of the lockdown, the national COVID lockdown, we worked with a brilliant organisation, Southall Black Sisters, and campaigned for the government to open vacant hotel rooms. Obviously, they were all vacant at that stage, to domestic abuse survivors who would otherwise have been locked in with an abuser during the whole of lockdown. Sadly, the government didn't do that. I should say they did, in response to our letter, give additional funding to domestic violence charities, but wasn't really appropriate in the circus. It wasn't really exactly what we needed. But anyway, I should also say this was done with lots of hotel chains and hostels who came forward brilliantly and just said, yes, we see this absolutely needs to happen. We want to support you. But it needed government help. They needed financing. They needed authority to work with the police and so on. But the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, did do it. And he opened 92 hotel rooms at the start of lockdown. So far, 136 women and children have used those hotel rooms. And the scheme is extended to November, and we're seeing if it can be extended beyond that. So postcode lottery, we wanted it nationwide. It was only done in London, but it was still, it was some contribution, 92 rooms being made available. I think we could still take something from that. And it's still something we're working on. So we're trying to contact all of the mayors and say to them, look, this is a system that's worked in London, do the same, because we're going to face more lockdowns. That's pretty clear over the next year or so. So it's still something that we can push further on.
Well, congratulations, because I know what it takes to get any small victory in this space. And I think you've done a fantastic job of doing that. And particularly on each of those projects and all of your events, if you like, are aligned with what we're doing, because it seems to me this whole idea of raising the profile of the value, the social value of compassion and kindness, and how that forms the ground for well-being. And I suppose one of the things that I was going to ask you was, because that represents a different perspective from the old style politics, are you having any support or encouragement from different media outlets? Because of course media are notoriously unkind, and I'm wondering whether there's been any reactions from media organizations, either major or minor, to your proposals.
Great question. I think we've had both sides, really. We've been really lucky and supported by some media outlets who their editorial line is just fully sort of supportive. They can see the huge problems, particularly on the sort of debate discourse side, and want to help. And also like the fact that we just come with a different perspective. I mean, particularly when, we launched in 2018, we basically existed for a year during our first year was only Brexit, was all that. It's hard to remember that now, but that was all that we talked about, and people really wanted a different perspective. So it's coming in with a new way of looking at issues, to them was very fresh and exciting. But we've also had the opposite extreme, where I think people just don't get it. They are very much in the mindset that news is about what one party said about the other, or how this politician's tripped up, or this latest scandal, and to them is not of particular great interest, and we can only really get cut through if we're criticizing one party or the other, which isn't really our aim at all. It's to openly criticize actions and policies, or build them up if we feel that they align with our values, but it's not really to go after individuals. So that can be difficult, and we're trying to support organisations where we can that are obviously looking at the media narrative as well, because as you say, that's a very obvious place where there's a lot of unkindness. And one thing we're working on the launch of is a campaign against online abuse against public figures, particularly female and BAME public figures, because Twitter and Facebook in particular could do so much more to protect their users than they're currently doing.
No, I think that's a really brilliant step forward. I suppose one of the things that's interesting to me is that compassion and kindness and well-being, in many ways, are not party political. They're not left, and they're not right, and they're not centre. My view is that they're above. And I'm wondering how we can bring people together from different political traditions to appreciate the value of that and the value of that collaboration in that space. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that, but seeing, I know that there are people from different political parties who claim to be compassionate, who I believe are absolutely genuine in that. But somehow our thinking and our tribalism prevents us from engaging with each other and collaborating. Is it only within the parliamentary group that you're talking about, the grouping that you were talking about, that those kind of exchanges can happen, or are there other forums where that is a possibility?
I mean, definitely other forums too, and our parliamentarians are always reaching out to others to try and engage them. I think, coming back to the question about how do we encourage MPs or parliamentarians to see that as a legitimate driver, I think this possibly sounds naive. I think a lot of MPs enter Parliament to make the world a better place, and find that their attempts to do so are very often thwarted by a range of circumstances built by the political system. The whips, as I said, the need to toe the party line, the long hours, the lack of power, all of those things. So we can talk to them about those specific practical things that are inhibiting their ability to enact compassion in the public sphere. And so that's one way that we can talk to their frustrations and we understand them. I think another thing is that we're looking to do is launch compassion training for MPs. There's been a very successful course run by the Mindfulness Initiative, training MPs in mindfulness, and a lot of them that have gone through that have reported, it's genuinely transformed the way they look at issues, the way they treat one another, the way they understand what other people think, or they try to understand what other people think. And we want to model something similar. So, and again, it's all about showing MPs that we're not there to call them out for a lack of compassion. We're there to say we need to look at the structural problems that are inhibiting compassion and empathy and kindness in the system, and try and work with you to change that, because it'll only benefit them as much as well as benefiting the public. So in terms of outside Parliament, we want to, I mean, it runs through every aspect of our politics. So that's local campaigning, it's how issues get talked about on the doorstep, it's local councils and how much they interact with the public and what kind of politics they represent in a debating chamber. And there's a whole raft of resources out there about how you can approach things more compassionately, mindfully, empathetically, and encouraging representatives to find time in their day to look at those and engage with them, I think is really important, and could be something that people can do that genuinely will transform the politics from, I don't like bottom up, because it's hierarchical, but transform it across the system and not just from Westminster.
That's great. I mean, in a way, it's one of the partners of the festival is Carnegie UK Trust, who you may have come across. Been doing some marvellous work in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and also in small towns across the country around how kindness can influence policy and change policy, and how that delivers a higher quality of engagement with the public. I'm also interested in not only policy engagement, but also your suggestion of these constituency boards. I think it would be really marvelous if we could perhaps have one of those. There may be politicians in Leeds who wanted to develop a constituency board structure using a kind of citizens' assembly methodology or something similar to that. And I'm wondering whether we could partner up together to develop something around that. A couple of initiatives I'd like to mention to you, because I think this space of evolving democracy to be more functional, more collaborative, more respectful is very important in giving people agency and a sense that they are truly represented. One idea about inclusive democracy is to look at the idea of different, not simply groupings, but if you like, psychological perspectives, because we all have our own different views, and trying to get a distribution of participants in conversations that represent not just organizations, but if you like, different generations, different life experiences, and if you like, different psychologies. So I think that idea of a constituency board could be very exciting. And some people I'd like to introduce to you about
Wonderful.
that, who are working on a similar model. But I think before we finish, I wonder whether there's anything that you want to share about the plans that you have for the coming year that people can engage with. And then perhaps I'd just ask you if there's one person or one quote that has really made a difference to you or to people that you know. I'm not expecting anything amazing. I'm just saying sometimes it's the simplest thing that makes a difference. So any plans for going forward that people could get involved with, and what is it that is there a particular person or project or quote that's particularly inspired you?
Oh, what a lovely way to end. Project-wise, well, on the constituency boards, please do. I'd love to follow. We should definitely follow up on that. I think the main, aside from the things I've mentioned already, the other main project for the APPG, it's sort of a big project in itself linked to another even bigger project, but listeners and viewers may know already, but I understand and appreciate probably not. We've been working on a proposal called the Compassion Act, which I'll keep this very short. Currently in the UK, we don't have socioeconomic rights, basically. That's highly unusual and a symptom of not having a written constitution. We want to put those rights in place. So basically it says you have a right not to be hungry, homeless, or without decent income. And that's what the Compassion Act would do. And we have support from a range of parties to try and implement that. So that's a campaign that's sort of further down the line. But in the immediate future, we want to try and make sure that an equality impact assessment is done on every COVID legislation that comes out from the government, because you can it's been so obvious how the young, people with disabilities, people from BAME communities, women have been largely left behind, disregarded in the way that policy has been made, and many MPs are worried about the lack of scrutiny that they have been given. So a proper equality impact assessment with people from a representative range should be making these, of walks of life, should be making these decisions. So that's kind of fits in with the Compassion as part of that representative equality rights driven agenda. In terms of the last part about who has, or a quote, or a person who's inspired me, I'm rubbish. I wish I was one of those people that could just remember quotes. You know, people who walk around, they know Shakespeare, Homer, whatever. I can't do that. But I say this quite often. But if people get a chance to, I would recommend that they read The Compassionate Mind by Professor Paul Gilbert. Paul established the Compassionate Mind Foundation. He's a clinical psychologist at the University of Derby. I fanboy him an awful lot, but basically that book for me was what inspired me to get him to look more at compassion and the power it has. I mean, obviously it's a word, it's a value, but it has so much more meaning beyond that about the way that you approach life. And for anyone who needs a very quick summary, he talks through how our brains are not evolved for the kind of life that we now lead. It's constantly in conflict between old and new brain, and we just need to be an awful lot kinder to ourselves and recognize the incredibly difficult position that we found ourselves in with modern living. It's not conducive to a great deal of happiness, and there's a lot that can be changed, but while we're trying to change it, be kind, because it's tough. And that really inspired me.
Thank you very much, Matt. I have to say that I heard Paul Gilbert speak at your event, and
of course,
he is absolutely amazing. I would definitely recommend that people look for his book. And just to say once again, thank you for the work that you're doing. Let's collaborate more. We'll put your website up on the follow-up Watch Again page. And let's hope that we can create an event together next year going forward for next year's Kindness, Compassion and Wellbeing Festival, which will be coming from Leeds, but is involving people from many different places. And we've already had some twinning requests from different places. So wouldn't that be great to have a network of kinder cities and kinder towns and kinder villages? But thank you for your thoughts and your work, and I look forward to participating in a constituency board meeting in Leeds to create a more compassionate politics.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Joshua.
Again.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the time. You too.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.